Hi, everybody. And to those that I've met before in previous webinars or previous project work with How To, really great to have you here. Most of you who have joined today are probably pretty aware that How To accessibility is at the core of everything we do. And we also know from our work with organisations and from our work with government and just sort of living in the real world that it is actually critical for everyone, which is why you're all here today. Not just because of the legislation that is there to support people with disability, but also because it actually benefits everybody. And that is the key purpose, is to really be inclusive of everybody. And one of the examples of that is in our last webinar. I'm not sure if you attended, but 48% of the group at the end said that they wish that they knew more. It's a top priority. Accessibility and digital accessibility is a top priority for them. And other numbers and then sort of dwindled down to sort of say, well, but we don't really know what to do, or we don't really understand the WCAG guidelines. They're too complex. So today's webinar is about trying to simplify a little bit of the WCAG guidelines and to just give you and empower you with the idea that you can do it, you and your teams, you can actually advocate for accessibility, and hopefully through just simplifying things a little bit about what you can do, not all the stuff that happens in the programming in the back end of web and app development, but what you can do at the front end to actually help make your digital courses or learning more accessible. One of the things that I did hope to make sure that everybody takes away today in terms of, key statements or key takeaways is that we believe, and we want you to believe also, in inclusive design is good design. So, if it's not inclusive, it's not good. And inclusion is for everyone. It's not, there's not pockets of people that we're aiming at. We're actually aiming at everybody. What we're going to cover today is what is digital accessibility and why it's important. That's obviously a lot already in your hearts and minds and why you're here. So we're not going to focus too much on that. We're going to then go into more of those practical pointers and strategies, which we know that you're here for. So what is digital accessibility? Here's a little video we prepared earlier.
There are a lot of myths about inclusive design. That it's hard work, that it's boring or uncreative, that it's just about cutting things out or putting things in, or most importantly, that it's only for people with disabilities. The truth is, we're all different, and who we are changes over time. Our different abilities are just one part of the infinite spectrum of human life, and designs that reach more people are more likely to have a greater impact. Whether that's a curb ramp, or automatic doors, or closed captions on a video, or contrasting color combinations, you never know who might be using it and how. So whatever you're designing, make sure it can be perceived, operated, understood, and is robust for all people, always.
Next, we're going to talk about the importance and benefits. So you'll see here I've got an image of a person using a head mouse and in front of a computer and using the that technology, I guess, to help them. And one of the reasons for the importance of digital accessibility, and there's many, but you may not be aware, but nearly 20% of Australians live with disability. The ABS most recent statistic reported was back in 2019. There might be more recent ones that I'm not aware of, but it was actually 17.7% that they came back with then. So just imagine that what you do and how you build your digital content can potentially include 20% of Australian people. Or could make inclusion for them better. So that's just a simple, if you need a reason, that's a pretty simple reason to start embracing digital accessibility. And another, I guess, reason for embracing it is the curb cuts and innovation that are actually happening and ever evolving to make, I guess, the world more accessible for people with disability, and actually the benefits that happen as a result of that. So when we talk about curb cuts, I'm not sure if many people have heard of that before, but think of the time at a point where, you know, roads were being built and they started building in the ramps. So this image that we're looking at here is there's a signpost on the corner of a street, and the curb has been cut down into a ramp, which then obviously enables people with wheels. So that could be a person initially intended, I'm sure, for people in wheelchairs to be able to more easily cross a road. But where we talk about curb cuts is actually some of the innovations and some of the designs that are happening for accessibility are actually then opening up access for other people who it wasn't really even intended for, which is really eye-opening, because it means that what we can do when we think of ways to make our content more accessible is thinking about actually the impact that it's having on other people as well. So, for example, the person riding across is hopefully following the road rules for a start, but then other people that are benefited by that curb cut, for example, are you know, mothers with prams, elderly people with walkers, even just elderly people or who are having trouble seeing the edge of the curb. So that's just an example of some curb cuts. But other examples in a more digital sort of world, because that's obviously very physical, are things like, you know, the subtitles on a video. It's as simple as that. Like, I don't know if you're aware, but Netflix was taken to court years ago because they had all these videos that they were streaming without captions or subtitles. And since then, and they were lost and they had to actually then start doing that. Since then, that's been reported by Netflix. I did look up a statistic yesterday that 40% of people are now actually using subtitles, watching just shows even in their own language, because it's just handy. And I know I do it. I do it in every single video, everything I stream. I now always have the subtitles on. Is anybody else the same? Anybody else can think of any other curb cuts in terms of what you're doing digitally for accessibility in your business? Other curb cuts? I'm just trying to think. I can think of physical ones. Just wondering if anyone else. Yeah, accents. I heard that too. Yeah. So, you know, we've presented the importance and the benefits in a really simplified way. There's obviously, you know, much more complexity to it than that. But moving on, we understand that, you know, we'll have, with all the best intentions, there are still barriers in our organisations around the world and in Australia, and for you guys, to prioritising accessibility. So just to take a little moment to talk about, and in the chat, write down some of those barriers that you're experiencing, or even perhaps even that you've been able to move or get rid of. Because prioritising accessibility, and you'll hear me say it again, is, you know, the absolute topmost thing that your organisation can do to you know, build a more inclusive workplace, and especially within the digital realm that we're here for today. Yeah, time constraints, slang phrases, and I have to really check myself on that. I'm a bit of an Aussie. Yeah, lack of knowledge. We hear that a lot. We've talked about barriers. So let's now move on to some of those strategies and some tips that you can do, you know, from at a personal level, and also obviously then, you know, share with others to help bring digital accessibility up as high as you can get it. I'm not going to dive straight into the nitty-gritty and the actual practical things, because I think being how-to and being people that prioritize accessibility so much, I do want to get you started on that sort of foundational level. We highly recommend, highly encourage that you do whatever you can do to prioritize accessibility in the work that you do. And then obviously share that, and whether that's at an organizational top level, if that's where you're sitting in your role, or whether you're in a design level that isn't able to control too much of what's going on in the business, everybody can prioritize accessibility. The next thing that we recommend is, and that's part of after prioritizing accessibility, is use what you're learning to spot the barriers that are happening, to look around your business, to look at the communications that are going out in your emails or in your intranet, to look at the training that's being delivered. Look for where there might be barriers occurring that are stopping people from being able to properly digest and interact and access in the same way as anybody else. And don't be afraid to speak up about that. And you'll spot these things, as I just said, on your website, in your customer communications, in meetings, even meetings like this, making sure that people are giving, got plenty of time to organize themselves to join a meeting and to be present in a meeting. The digital aspects of the recruitment process, obviously we can't go there today, and I know a lot of people are working on that, but that these are the places where you can spot those barriers and speak up about them. And the next thing in the big picture is to teach others to teach others. So you're in a position, obviously you're keen to learn while you're here today, and we can't teach you everything in 30 minutes. But we can actually, as I said before, empower you, make you feel like, you're a bit of an ambassador and an advocate, so that as you go out and you do learn things because you need to, or you need to pick up your skills, you can actually then teach others, and then build that culture that we're talking about. And finally, in that big picture realm, and this is where I think it does become a little bit more practical and a little bit more hands-on, and things you can do, is to build the accessibility related steps or interventions into your methods, process and systems. And what I mean by that is, simply, for example, we're talking about designing a learning module. That's what I do. It's easy for me to talk about that as an example. One of the first things that our designers do when they are given a job is they start putting a color palette together and picking up some images, but they don't leave it till the end to check the color contrast of their images or the palette. They actually do that at the beginning. So within your methods of design, within your methods of, organizing a meeting, that sort of thing, build the accessibility steps into those methods. And then again, in your processes and in your systems, there's not one single step that we could say, yay, just add this into every process and you'll be set. But one thing that we can say is, in every process or system or method, is that if you have built in user testing and feedback, everybody can do that. Then you're actually putting yourself in the absolute best position to operate in a way that is right for your people and the people who you have employed with you, or the people that you're trying to communicate with. And so that's why I've just sort of given this set of information a little bit more attention, giving it its own block. Regular user testing, including people with disabilities. So, and when we talk about user testing, it could be, again, so what we did this morning, Siobhan and I opened up the meeting, and we did it yesterday as well, but testing, if I share this, will that happen? What happens for somebody who might not be able to read that? And we did that yesterday. And we actually changed a fair bit of what we had in this presentation, because we felt that some things may not be able to be perceived very well for people who may have a sight problem. So yeah, that things like that, user testing is really, really important. And putting it in your processes, and same with feedback. A lot of times in learning, we have feedback at the end. We hand out a survey, or we deliver these days probably something digital. But that's not necessarily the time always. Obviously, it's a good time to get feedback, but you want to be putting into your processes the feedback and questions around accessibility in things like your employee voice of your employee surveys, your in that user testing process. You know, how was this accessible to you? Were the images clear? Did you understand how to navigate? Did you know those sorts of questions need to be included in all of those surveys that you use throughout your organization to actually gain more, you know, better from the source feedback, so that you can act on that feedback and then, you know, develop those strategies and that culture that we're talking about, and this vision for digital accessibility and inclusion. So that's our strategic advice. That's the heartfelt bit that I was talking about earlier. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the technical, but again, trying to keep it simple and trying to keep it actionable for you. So getting your head around WCAG 2.1 can be tricky. So WCAG 2.1 basically sets its criteria or its vision for digital accessibility across 4 principles, which you can see on the screen here. I've got a big P, which stands for perceivable, and then O for operable, then a U for understandable, and R for robust. So altogether spells poor. So poor is what we are saying if you're trying to keep things at a conceptual level to help you build your accessibility sort of mindset, then think of the PAW acronym or initialism. So when we talk about perceivable, and I'll just open that up. When we talk about perceivable, what we're actually talking about is making content available to the senses, including your sight, your hearing, and your touch. So the really simple examples of that that you can get involved in are things like your you know, alt text on images, your captions on videos. So what you're doing by that is you're allowing somebody who wouldn't be able to digest something in one way to be able to digest and perceive that, because you're making that possible in another way. So some other examples within all the criteria, I guess, of the perceivable principles are orientation. And what that means is, you know, you don't want to limit your course to only be, or your digital content to only be viewable in a certain orientation, because that can, you know, make it less perceivable, I guess, for some people. Also the use of color. So that's where your color contrast comes into things, because if, you know, you're not getting that right, then again, that image or whatever it is that's using that color contrast is making it harder for people to actually perceive what's happening. And then another one that's in the perceivable criteria is that resizing of text, which some of you have probably, you know, dealt with in your roles, where you need to be able to design something in a way that a person can resize it to whatever magnification they need for their access needs, without it becoming blurry, without it becoming no longer able to be perceived. And that's one of the main reasons why we and you would hopefully be aware of this too, is that we certainly don't encourage, or we avoid using images that have text in it where the text actually is meaningful to what you're trying to convey. Because as you resize images, obviously, as you know, there's a good chance it'll become pixelated, and therefore you lose the meaning because you can't read the text anymore. So that's perceivable. When we talk about operable, a lot of the criteria in there, as you can, if you sort of think about it, can imagine, is actually about how a person can operate your digital content and how they interact with it, often using different technologies. It can be just using a keyboard, using a head pointer, that sort of thing. We've got other things in there to make things operable, about making your hierarchy of text have meaning. So that means, you know, you have a heading 1 at the beginning, and if you've got a subheading, that's heading 2, and then if you've got normal text, that's paragraph text. What that means, and the reason that we do that, is it makes it possible for somebody to navigate to where they want to on a page. If they're using something other than, you know, their site and a mouse, which is obviously conventional, but if people aren't using those things, it's not necessarily always easy to sort of go back and say, oh, I want to look at that letter P again, if you don't know where it is on the screen. Or I want to go back and look at that heading or that subheading. So how do I navigate back to that? So there's all these layers of hierarchy and the focus order by which your pages are set up, so that different technologies can actually work their way through the pages or through the interactions in a logical order, and an order that makes the operable for the user. So again, just trying to simplify the principles. I know that there is a lot more, and I'm you know, quite deliberately keeping it simple. Okay, so the third one is understandable. Understandable. A lot of the understandable things actually happen in the background of programming when you're talking about digital design in web apps and websites, that sort of thing. But one of the things that you can do, or that are sort of more relevant to you when it comes to understandable, is the use of language, the use of headings, the use of prompts. So again, making sure that the way you're describing things, or when you're giving instructions for things, that it's consistent, that it's easy to understand, that you're not using unusual phrases that don't make sense to all people, or don't make sense in sort of the general English language in its sort of base use. And also about labeling things. So again, as you can see, it'll be a little bit hard to see because it's quite small, but I'm hovering over the back button of this module at the moment. It's right down the bottom on the right. And as you can see, well, what I can see is a back button little label pops up. Same with when I hover over the menu at the top right, a little label pops up. So what that means is when I'm seeing that label, I know that the programming has happened in the back end that actually is then able to communicate with any kind of assistive technology what that button is for and what it will do, and what the user can expect if they activate that button. So that's what labeling is all about. And so, you know, lo and behold, How To has got it all set up for you. So that's awesome. And then finally, with R is robust. Robust is sort of kind of nearly covered by all the other things that you do, if you do all of those other things correctly, because robustness is about your content, or your digital contents, compatibility with tools and devices and browsers, and it's all about making sure that all of those names and programming things that are happening in the background are done in a way that it can be compatible with those devices, that you can, you know, that it can read out things and understand what's actually happening, so that a user can operate within there. And it's about testing, you know, testing that compatibility as well. And once again, you know, you'll hear me say it a few times, and apologies if it sounds sort of salesy, but I guess it's just, I'm lucky enough to have a tool where I can actually show you how this tool is actually already doing a lot of these things for you. And so it's just great to use as an example. So that's the simplification of the PAW principles. So next is just going into some tips. We've got 7 tips, so we're up to number 3. And I've tried again just to keep it into sort of functional, actionable things that you guys can do. So within graphics and audio, the types of things that you would be already aware of, or you may have heard of, but you're not quite sure how to do, or what the rules are, is to make sure that your graphics have a 3:1 ratio color contrast. So I'm going to use this page now as a test to show you how we would check that. There are many different color contrasting tools out there. I use color contrast analyzer. I know the design team use a different one. They're both as accurate and as, I guess, legitimate, I can't think of a better word, as the others, as each other. This one's from Vision Australia, so that's why I like it. So what I do is, or what we'll do is, we'll just check the foreground color. I'm going to choose this orange color. It does actually, there's that color. And I'm going to choose the white as the background color. And as you can see, my results here is telling me for a contrast for text, it's failing as regular text, but if it was large text, it'd be okay at a AA level. And for a AAA level, it's failing. And that's for when, you know, you might really be expanding or really manipulating the page to try to get it to whatever the person needs. But luckily, we're not talking about text. So down the bottom here, we can say this is non-text contrast. So anything that isn't text at a AA level, and this one passes between the orange and the white. So yay, good on you, Kiernan. We did actually change the color because we tested it before we presented it and built it. And yeah, it was originally yellow. So that's the color contrast that you can do with your graphics. The other thing that you can do with graphics, obviously, is put alt text to describe. Now, I've put alt text on this image, but I'm just interested to know, if you were looking at this particular page, would you mark that image on this screen as decorative, or would you think that it's you know, important to be read out to an unsighted or a sight impaired person? And that's the sort of things that we need to be thinking about. Is this actually necessary to be read out? Is it actually contributing to the learning or to the information? In this instance, I've done it more for an example, because what I've done is I have also put a transcript in for a little piece of audio. And this little piece of audio is actually the recording of the screen reader reading this page. So I just wanted to get you to listen to what it actually sounds like when somebody is testing, or when a user would be listening using the screen reader to read this page. Let's have a listen to see what it sounds like.
Heading level 1-3. Graphics and audio. Sample subheading text. Entering audio section. Button play audio. Audio progress bar slider 0. Button mute volume. Button show transcript. Exiting audio section. Graphic 2 professional people shaking hands. Visited link www.howto.co graphic. Accessibility webinar. 18% complete. Link go to previous page. Link go to next page.
Great. So as you can see, we could hear that the graphic was read out because we had alt text. So that's one of the really important things to remember. And also, if somebody wasn't able to hear that audio, that the fact that we have a transcript available means that that person can then digest that information. So it's just another example of, you know, you're being asked to do these things, but, you know, they really do make a difference, and they're, you know, really very important. So that's graphics and audio. Video is another area, obviously, where we can make things more perceivable. And that, again, is by doing things like making a transcript or making an audio description. And sometimes people aren't aware of what the difference is between those things, and whether or not they need both of those things. And the other thing, obviously, as you saw when I played this before, excuse me, is that we have these closed captions also available. So what we're looking for when we assess a video, and what you can do when you are doing your improving your accessibility, is have a little bit of a checklist. And I've got one written on a different page that you can't see right now. Captions. Okay, tick that box. Yes, we have captions. But one of the things you've got to think about in captions is it timed right? Is it breaking up paragraphs or sentences to reduce the ability to actually cognitively understand what that's about? So just doing the captions and sticking them in is not quite enough. You really do need to monitor what the timings are, and monitor where it's making breaks, and make sure there is enough time to read each thing. Audio descriptions, I'm not sure if anyone's ever seen an audio description before, but it might be a little different to what you thought or think. Again, this is probably too small. I'll just make it nice and big. So when you're doing an audio description, it's actually about describing what's visually on the screen, as opposed, so for that's for somebody who isn't able to see, so they can hear what's actually being shown on the screen. So as you can see with ours here, it's a white ball on a pink background, tries to go uphill. The ball turns into a Newton's cradle, which I don't know what that is. And it transforms into scissors, which cut along a dotted line. So you will remember seeing that. So that's what an audio description looks like. So we talked about the video, we talked about captions. Another thing that, again, which is fantastic with how to, is whether or not a person can operate that using other tools or just using their keyboard. So for example, if I just press play, what you can see here is I can use my tabbing button to get to all of these buttons, and it will, and I can operate that using my keyboard. You can pause, so you need to be able to give people control over video, so that, you know, depending on what they need and how, if they may need to take longer and have more pauses, they need to be able to control that. And same with the audio. And also that the design is responsive. So you want your video to be playable and able to be made full screen if necessary, on any size device. And so that's that. Navigation and interactions. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you about navigation and interactions falls into the understandable and the operable principles. So for example, I would ask everyone to now tell me what prompt you would suggest I put for these for this interaction, which is a flip card. As you can see, there's a circular button there that is indicating something is going to flip. And also my images are a lady standing in front of a giant question mark raising her hands, and then the other one is a magnifying glass. So yeah, any ideas for prompts? And I'll quickly write that in. How about select the card to find out about navigation criteria. Notice that I use the word select. So one of the things that we say that's really important is to not use ableist language, or to be inclusive, really. So not thinking of it as a negative, but as a positive. Being inclusive means that we don't write click because some people aren't clicking. We don't write, you know, click the red circle because some people either are colorblind or they don't see the circle. So what we try to do is be very specific and very concise with our prompts, and also to make sure that you're being very consistent with how you're using those prompts. And in terms of interactions, I'll just go back into preview up here. It's about your headings and about making sure that they're not misleading or confusing, and are your buttons labeled correctly. So I'm going to show you something about that in just a minute. But when I talk about is my heading misleading or confusing, I have to tell you that I was the absolute worst culprit of being one of those crazy creative people who said, oh, I think it's really fun if you start the heading with, you know, the sky was blue and the flower died, because you thought, oh, that's like writing a novel. I'm going to get them really interested in this topic. But if it's not relating, obviously, to the subject underneath and the content underneath, and if it's not clearly describing to somebody, you know, this is what you're going to get on this page, then you're going to be discluding a lot of people who aren't necessarily going to, you know, pick up on your sense of humor or your particular sort of cultural, you know, joke. So That's one of the really important things as well. So thinking about your headings and thinking about your prompts and thinking about your buttons. So when you're labeling a button that needs to be clicked on, it needs to be really clear about what that button's going to do and what they can expect to happen next. So that's navigation and interactions. Nearly there. Understandable. I've sort of chosen to sort of just approach understandable from a whole principle kind of level. And also going to use this as a demonstration to show you about button labeling. And one of the really great things in how to, but if you're not using how to, then things that you should be considering in terms of understandable. So at the moment, we don't know what to do with this. It's just sort of sitting there. There's no instruction. Also, if we were to sort of hover around using our mouse, we would end up, or using our keyboard, we would end up being focused in on these buttons. So when we talk about understandable, one of the things, I just clicked on the language and readability one. One of the things that makes things understandable and readable is when you choose to use a reading level of about grade 9. That's sort of generally accepted. And then in terms of WCAG, if you need to have a more advanced reading level for your audience, you need to also be providing something that is actually at a different level for people who do require that, so that you're including those people. But generally reading level 9 is what's acceptable around, I guess, the world. Well, it's acceptable within the WCAG guidelines. Avoiding idioms and jargon. So I touched on that before with your headings. So something like, I think I've got a couple of examples here. You know, if you're spilling the beans means revealing a secret, but knocking over the beans or spilling the vegetables doesn't mean the same thing. So writing spilling the beans is not necessarily going to actually send the message that you're trying to send. So within the WCAG guidelines, it actually does talk about a little bit about, aside from the programmable stuff, it does talk a little bit about the importance of avoiding idioms and jargon, so that you're actually including people in the writing and the content. Also making sure that your instructions and button labeling, like, so if the next button is labeled next, then on the next page it also should be labeled next, so that things are predictable and consistent, so people understand what they need to do as they're navigating around, and that it doesn't sort of, I guess, like shock them. And again, I was a shocker for that. I thought, oh, we've got to make it different, you know, to keep it engaging. But having learned now and having taken on and adopted that prioritizing of accessibility, I realize now it's really important to make sure that, you know, moving from one thing to another, there needs to be a consistent way that things operate on that page, and people need to be able to predict what they need to do so that they can actually enjoy the experience and engage with that experience. So that's predictable and consistent. The one thing I was going to show you is, and talking about labeling, a lot of people wonder, how could anybody actually understand what they're about to click on when they're going into one of these hotspot type interactions? And what happens is, in the background, there's a thing called an ARIA label. And one of the great things about how to is, you know, we're all sort of set up for that, which is fantastic. So I can actually click on that button and go down here and find it. As you can see, I haven't put an ARIA label in there, because I'd be prompted to do that by how to if I hadn't done it by the end of the course, or by the end of the design process. So I would write exactly where on the image is this button sitting. So I would say probably signpost, and that way, as a screen reader is reading that out, it'll actually let them know they're clicking on an area on an image with a label called signpost. So then they're having that same experience that I'm having, because I know I'm clicking on the signpost. So that was just something else I wanted to show you about how to label things and the importance of labeling things. So assistive technology compatibility. Again, how to has kind of done a lot of this for you. We do that testing. We use you know, screen readers. We go to all the browsers. We, you know, do different operating systems. And every time we make updates, or even as we were building the platform, you know, all of that testing has taken place. it's ever evolving, and we're still constantly needing to do that checking. But something that you can do from your level is actually things like downloading NVDA, which is free to download. That's one of the screen readers. You may be lucky enough to be in an organisation where they're happy to buy you lots of tools that you can use for testing. You may have specific people who have access needs who, clearly identified the tools that they need. And of course, you need to be testing for those as well. And the other types of tools that you might come across or you might need to be testing for are screen magnifiers. So you can test that by magnifying your screen. But there is actually a lot of Microsoft stuff, and I don't want to advertise Microsoft, but I do know a lot of big organizations use Microsoft 365. And having done a bit of research and working with a few different organizations on things about accessibility, I can see a lot of very, very, very useful and helpful and practical information being put out there by Microsoft under the label of accessibility. So if you go into Microsoft and type accessibility, you will come across videos, tutorials, tools, loads and loads and loads and loads of resources. And I would suggest, that's a pretty good place to start, other than going, specifically to very, targeted tools. So basically the testing, the assistive technology compatibility at your end, things that you can do, and if you're not using how to, is to just trial a screen reader, see how things are reading in order, and whether or not buttons are being labeled correctly, all of that sort of thing. Try different browsers and different devices, publish your items, and trial them in as many different tools and in many different environments as you can. So that's my whirlwind accessibility. And now I really, really, really hope that you've got lots of questions that I can answer, because I know that's probably raised a lot of questions for you. So yeah, question time. Please fire away.
Kath, we've got a question in the chat.
So assistive technology compatibility. Again, How To has kind of done a lot of this for you. We do that testing. We use screen readers. We go to all the browsers. We do different operating systems. And every time we make updates, or even as we were building the platform, all of that testing has taken place. It's ever evolving, and we're still constantly needing to do that checking. But something that you can do from your level is actually things like downloading NVDA, which is free to download. That's one of the screen readers. You may be lucky enough to be in an organisation where they're happy to buy you lots of tools that you can use for testing. You may have specific people who have access needs who, clearly identified the tools that they need. And of course, you need to be testing for those as well. And the other types of tools that you might come across or you might need to be testing for are screen magnifiers. So you can test that by magnifying your screen. But there is actually a lot of Microsoft stuff, and I don't want to advertise Microsoft, but I do know a lot of big organizations use Microsoft 365. And having done a bit of research and working with a few different organizations on things about accessibility, I can see a lot of very, very, very useful and helpful and practical information being put out there by Microsoft under the label of accessibility. So if you go into Microsoft and type accessibility, you will come across videos, tutorials, tools, loads and loads and loads and loads of resources. And I would suggest, that's a pretty good place to start, other than going, specifically to very, targeted tools. So basically the testing, the assistive technology compatibility at your end, things that you can do, and if you're not using How To, is to just trial a screen reader, see how things are reading in order, and whether or not buttons are being labeled correctly, all of that sort of thing. Try different browsers and different devices, publish your items, and trial them in as many different tools and in many different environments as you can. So that's my whirlwind accessibility. And now I really, really, really hope that you've got lots of questions that I can answer, because I know that's probably raised a lot of questions for you. So yeah, question time. Please fire away.
Kath, we've got a question in the chat. So it says, in keeping things simple, logical, and all those important things for accessibility, where do you see the scope to still add personality and creativity that gives things original flavour? Great question, Andrea.
It's funny, I used to think the same thing when I started like 15 years ago with government federal. They were talking about accessibility then, and I used to think it was so restrictive. I had to put everything in a, this linear format. But I guess that it's really about your mindset. And when you're thinking about inclusion and when you're really prioritizing accessibility, your creativity is what you're sort of dependent on to still create things that are engaging and, and interactive. I know this isn't answering shit, but it's sort of up to you to continue to strive to do that while in that parameters of, considering accessibility. And again, talking about how it may sometimes seem, things are restrictive. I've only got a limited amount of interactions I can do. I've only got a limited amount of places I can lay out, or ways I can lay out that information. But as you can see, there's a very good reason for that, and it's all about that, making sure things are responsive. So therefore things do have to be in sort of set frames, making sure that there's headings and things are in a correct order. So that's all sort of like built in for you, and then it's up to you to use your words and your images and your instructional design expertise to work out, well, how do I make that flow? How do I make it? Often it's done by asking questions, and it's done by getting really good segues from one thing to the next, so that it's meaningful to move from this content about the legislation to do with asbestos. That's not very exciting. So, well, it might be to some people. So you move from that to say, and how does that legislation apply to you at the end of your words? And then instantly, while still sort of seemingly in not a very exciting creative space, you're engaging the learner and you're asking them to think about, well, what does that mean for you? And then you're providing them that information. So yeah, it's a lot to do with good instructional design. I'm sorry to say. I hope that was a good answer. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, I'd like to answer the what do you mean by AA? That question. So just so you know, that we are aware that WCAG 2.1 is actually going to go to WCAG 3 eventually. I think it's years off yet, but one thing that we do know is these standards. So it's A, AA, and AAA. And each of these standards I guess for want of different words, are levels of accessibility, like the height of accessibility that you're achieving. And so A is sort of the lowest and the standard. And I guess in the new world, in the WCAG 3 world, what we understand is it will be called the bronze level. And AA at the moment is probably the most accepted across organisations and what most organisations strive for. And that's where you actually are doing things like what we're talking about here, the focus order being in the right order, making sure buttons are labelled, and captions and audio descriptions and all of those sorts of things. When you're getting to a AAA level, you're talking about making sure that, for example, that video had a person doing Auslan as an optional way to consume that information. You're talking about, much greater levels of sort of, I guess, testing with assistive devices that are, like reading the code at the back end, to do whatever that assistive device is doing. So yeah, that's what AA is. And as I said, most organizations are striving for AA these days.
Awesome. It's from Kathy. It says, any recommendations for self-paced learning to refresh knowledge on accessibility in digital design? I'll also pop it in the chat.
I would go to where I was talking about before, which is that Microsoft world. And we're not trying to sell it. It's just something that I know they've put a lot of work into. It's reliable. We know it's going to be updated on a regular basis. So yeah, that's where I would go. I've got the link here. Yeah, so I can just pop that in the chat. Accessibility training essentials. It is very focused on Microsoft products. So I know that's not perfect for a lot of people, but you will get a lot out of it. Did you want me to pop that link in the chat? I can now. I'll just go, everyone. Anything else?
I'm also just going to pop in, this is a plug, but we have a bunch of blog posts on accessibility. So I'm just going to share that link as well. That is really useful.
Oh, sorry. I guess it's been the first one I said.
No. The Microsoft website is brilliant. So it's great to have a mix. We do have one question from someone that works with us, Lorraine. It's a great one. So Lorraine said, I've heard people talk about mobile responsive or mobile friendly. What does that mean?
Okay. I don't know what people mean by mobile friendly, because it could mean anything, I guess, really, but when we talk about mobile responsive, if you're looking up things in the WCAG guidelines, that's often referred to as reflow. If I go to a tablet size, or a phone size, see, it's actually repositioning the frames, or we call them frames, where that text is and where that image is being held. It's reflowing, it's changing things around so that you're still getting that same experience no matter what your device is. Whereas if it was just mobile friendly or not responsive, or didn't have a reflow possible, which I think you will find, and we love working with everybody and the tools that they need to use. So if you're a company or an organization that uses Articulate Storyline, we're obviously experts in that as well. But it's not necessarily built to be able to reflow like that. Rise, yes, but Articulate, no. What you will find is, if you went to a phone size like that, you would find the screen just made smaller in the middle and everything's still in the same position. So that's the difference.
Awesome. That's all the questions we have.
Thank you very much.